The Newsline.
Hello and welcome back to People's TV. We produced this video in direct response to a column published in the Sunday Times on July 20th, authored by Javid Yusuf. Just hearing the name, you kind of know where the writer is coming from. The column, titled A Time for Moral Clarity, Why Sri Lanka Must Recalibrate Its Foreign Policy on Israel, Palestine, and Gaza, presents a deeply problematic and misleading view that warrants a factual and critical rebuttal. The column begins by highlighting the arrests of Mohammed Rushdie and Mohammed Suhail under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, PTA, framing them as two young men detained merely for peacefully protesting alleged atrocities committed by the Israeli military in Gaza. The author claims these arrests undermine freedom of expression in Sri Lanka and raise troubling questions about the country's foreign policy. Before addressing the core issues, it's important to remind Mr. Yusuf that slogans like Free Palestine and Free Gaza are widely associated with Hamas, an organization designated as a terrorist group by many countries. In contexts where national security is at stake, individuals promoting such slogans may lawfully be detained under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, PTA, not for expressing peaceful dissent, but for potentially inciting extremist ideology. Framing such arrests as a failure of foreign policy or an attack on freedom of expression ignores the legitimate security concerns involved. Sri Lanka has suffered profoundly due to radical Islamist extremism, the 2019 Easter Sunday bombings being the most harrowing example. In that context, it is reasonable for law enforcement agencies to act when there are indications of individuals aligning themselves with ideologies tied to terrorism. More importantly, the column omits a critical fact. Forensic examination of devices seized during the investigation revealed links between the father of one of the arrested individuals and Zaran Hashim, the mastermind of the Easter Sunday attacks that killed 270 people including foreign tourists and injured over 500. This revelation made public by the Minister of Public Security, Honorable Ananda Wijayapala, cannot be brushed aside when evaluating the validity of the arrests. Throughout the rest of the article, the columnist insists that Sri Lanka should realign itself with Palestine and the so-called Palestinian cause. While the dog may wag the tail must never wag the dog. Similarly, Sri Lanka must carefully evaluate its position and act according to its own national interest, not under external pressure or emotional manipulation. This principle applies not only to foreign policy but to all aspects of governance, economic policy, defense, diplomacy, and beyond. We cannot afford to become a stubborn nation like Russia or China, blindly opposing the international community. Here's why. We are a country that recently declared bankruptcy. We are only now beginning to rise from the ashes. Our recovery and progress depend on maintaining good relations with the broader international community, not isolating ourselves in the name of misguided ideological loyalty. That is the essence of Sri Lanka's foreign policy, non-alignment. We don't take sides. We prioritize national interest. Sri Lanka cannot stand in isolation with any single country, let alone a failed territory like Palestine. We must also acknowledge that the so-called Palestinian cause today has been hijacked. It is no longer a movement for statehood. It has become a facade worn by Islamist jihadist terrorists, hell-bent on destroying Israel, the only true democratic state in the Middle East. Therefore, we directly challenge the pro-Hamas media outlets and politicians who continue to promote this narrative in the name of human rights. Do not, even in your wildest dreams, attempt to turn Sri Lanka into a pro-Hamas or pro-Palestinian state. Sri Lanka cannot afford to adopt a pro-stance toward any country or movement, especially one associated with armed terrorism. To do so would be to jeopardize our national security, diplomatic standing, and fragile economic recovery. To suggest that these arrests reflect a broken foreign policy is not only absurd, but it also seems to be a deliberate attempt to mislead the public. We question the editorial responsibility of the Sunday Times in publishing this piece, especially under the supervision of Editor-in-Chief Sina Magara Ranachinga and Assistant Editor Amin Itzadeen. The column attempts to conflate unrelated matters, national security, foreign policy, and the Israel-Hamas conflict, to suggest that Sri Lanka is distancing itself from the Palestinian cause. It presents a false dilemma, that supporting the Palestinian cause is somehow a litmus test of Sri Lanka's foreign policy morality. We must ask, what tangible benefit has Sri Lanka gained by standing with Palestine? What role can a politically fragmented and economically dependent territory like Palestine play in improving the welfare of Sri Lankan citizens? Let's not forget that a former president of Sri Lanka once donated $1 million to Palestine, using taxpayers' money, at a time when ordinary Sri Lankans were struggling to survive in a collapsed economy. Palestine, as a territory reliant almost entirely on international aid, has no economic strength, political stability, or strategic leverage that can meaningfully assist Sri Lanka. It cannot offer us trade, employment, investment, or diplomatic support. So why should we compromise our national security and foreign policy in the name of allegiance to a cause that gives us nothing in return? Sri Lanka follows a non-aligned foreign policy. This does not mean we blindly side with any cause, particularly one associated with extremist violence. Supporting the Palestinian cause should not come at the cost of national security or international credibility. Nor should Sri Lanka be guilt-tripped into taking a pro-Hamas stance under the guise of human rights advocacy. The journalist narrative also distorts the current geopolitical landscape. Contrary to what is implied, several Gulf nations, including the UAE and Saudi Arabia, quietly support Israel's campaign against Hamas. For these countries, Hamas is not a noble resistance group but a destabilizing, extremist entity, a thorn in their eye that they would rather see eliminated. In fact, many Arab leaders view Israel's actions in Gaza as doing the dirty work they themselves cannot openly carry out due to political sensitivities. The notion that Sri Lanka would lose the favor of Arab states by refusing to support the so-called Palestinian cause is not just false, it's outdated. Today's Gulf politics is less concerned with Palestine and more focused on stability, countering Iran's regional influence, and economic growth. Aligning with Hamas, even indirectly, could harm Sri Lanka's image not only in the West but also among moderate Arab nations who now see Hamas as part of the problem, not the solution. Then there's the matter of Israeli tourists. Toward the end of the article, Yusuf's real agenda surfaces. He implies that Sri Lanka's hosting of Israeli travelers somehow undermines our values, as if allowing peaceful tourists into our country is morally wrong. This is disgraceful. Israel, despite being condemned by our political leaders, has continued to support Sri Lanka, supplying military hardware during the war against the LTTE, and even today offering employment to thousands of our workers. These are the facts Yusuf refuses to acknowledge. It is irresponsible to mislead the public by emotionally manipulating terms like moral clarity and human rights while ignoring the very real threat posed by extremist ideologies. We also note a disturbing pattern. Some journalists and commentators appear more interested in amplifying radical narratives than protecting the national interest. Their selective outrage and one-sided advocacy raise serious concerns. Finally, let us remind Mr. Yusuf and others like him, Sri Lanka cannot afford to become a proxy battlefield for foreign ideological conflicts. The country must prioritize its own security, sovereignty, and social harmony above all else. We urge the public and law enforcement authorities to remain vigilant and not be swayed by narratives that blur the lines between activism and extremism. If this report helped you see the situation on the ground clearly, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe to People's TV, where truth has no agenda, and facts speak louder than spin.
Subscribe us for more details.